Hey guys, it's Davin from Smart Simple Fit. This is my recent discussion that I had with Hypertrophy with Kev. I suggest you go follow him on Instagram. I just want to give you a little heads up. I did have some technical issues with the recording of this episode, so unfortunately I couldn't show you guys the full recording. This is basically the second half or the last third of the episode, so some of the topics such as genetics being a cope and also exercise selection and a little bit more that we talked about. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to keep that in the episode, so it's going to start a little bit abruptly. Hopefully, I can have Kevin back on the show in the future, and we can discuss some of those other topics that you don't get to see today, and some other topics as well. I really enjoyed my discussion with Kevin, and I hope you guys enjoy the portion that you get to see today. Anyways, thanks for stopping by. Enjoy.
That story about up near the border, Minnesota and Canada.
Oh yeah, so let's regroup.
Yeah.
Bears are nothing to mess with. So like you said, food and dominion and protecting yourself. Obviously, animals' lives matter to me as well.
Totally.
But also, animals, just like us, they're gonna do what we do. They want to survive too. They want to be able to eat. They want to be able to nourish themselves
Yep.
and defend their young. There's many things that we do that are very animal in nature. So, and like I said, if you see a bear and you're too close, check your pants. It's a terrifying situation. Very,
Yeah.
very scary.
What kind of bears? Black bears, brown bears?
Black bears. And the thing
They're
is,
still
black
big.
bears are very
Yeah.
curious. Grizzlies, actually, I've been to Montana where there were bears, and you keep making noise before you go around a corner just so you respect each other's space and stuff like that. So nature is a very real thing, and just because you like to go outdoors and you like game, I think people actually respect nature more than you think that
Totally.
happen to do stuff outside for recreation as far as game hunting or fishing, etc.
Absolutely. Not to mention, I mean, your average hunter or fisherman is probably a pet owner and has children. So the idea that, like the Disney movie, right, where nature undefiled by man is just in like pristine condition and is just nice all the time. And it's these mean guys that come in there and ruin it all and are hurting the
Exactly.
animals. And, that's just cartoons, right? That doesn't match reality. So you can appreciate the beauty and have respect for the animals, but understand there's a very real danger. There's a dynamic there between man and animal kind. Yeah,
Right. What are your
absolutely.
thoughts on the carnivore diet studies?
I have to say, I've really not gone that far into either the literature that vegans present or the carnivores, but I have to say, I am suspicious of both. What I will
Yes,
say is, it is obvious that animal products are very nutritious generally. Red meat's very nutritious. I think eggs are very nutritious. When you just go through the list and the quantities of different like vitamins and minerals that are in animal products, it's really hard to argue with, especially when you see how well a lot of these things, maybe not dairy for some people, but they digest really well. But that being said, when people start going down the rabbit hole of like organ meats and they talk about like it's going to like cure everything, your libido, boost your testosterone, all these kind of crazy things, I almost reject some of what carnivores say just on the basis that the claims are just silly. Like if you just
exactly.
did a compilation of what other supplement things are claiming and then added the carnivore gurus to it, it's all pretty consistent. I don't think any of them have the secret codes of getting your vitality back figured out.
Yep.
I think it's just going to be common sense things at the end of the day. So I don't really have much to say on it. I'm pretty ignorant of the carnivore literature. Have you? Have you investigated it some, what their claims are in studies?
Very vaguely, but I got kind of a laugh when Sean Baker was talking about how optimal the carnivore diet was and how amazing it is. And this was on the Derek Moore Plays More Dates channel. He had to go back on his own word And I'll give him credit. He admitted that he was wrong, but he said, well, I guess we do need carbohydrates after all to have a better hormonal profile, so to speak, and like feel healthy. So his free testosterone, I think, was just like a 90-year-old man free testosterone because of his ways. And then he
Wow.
said, well, I got to go back on my word here because he had to start eating carbs because his body was just so out of whack because
Yeah.
it was such an extreme diet. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people just, they take, like I said, they just take a front of the study and they assume that that's the real meaning behind it.
Yep. Yep. And going back
Exercise
to,
every
there was a point I made about isolating variables in exercise programs. If someone isolates a finding in a study, that's a problem. To be like,
yes.
this increased this. It's like, okay, but was it a clinically significant level? And then even then you have a problem where the definition of clinically significant is subjectively determined by researchers, right?
Yep.
Or some kind of precedent of research. So yeah, even then when you isolate a variable of a study and it's like, this is the part that I wanted, sometimes if you go just a little further back in the study, there'll be two other findings that make you call into question that one that you isolated. You went, I jumped the gun by being too excited because I didn't put it in the context of the rest of the findings within the same study. And that's a
Exactly.
shame when that happens. Oh yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Good, good.
Yeah, that's really good points about the studies and variables on the study that are not isolated, that are not controlled. They kind of just let it go however way they want it to go, and that's the that's the moral of the study is based on a non-controlled variable. It's really, to me, that's very disingenuous.
It is.
But
Yeah.
that's a lot of studies, and they're legally allowed to put whatever part of the study they want into it, so they can twist the words around. It's like watching the movie based on a true story. Okay, what's the true story?
And
So
how much does it have to match it to be considered based on, right? Like,
exactly,
yeah.
and Jeffrey Berry Schofield even pointed out linked to. If something says linked to in a topic or a study or an article, you got to be very, very suspicious.
Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of the whole, in defense of the carnivore guys, when it's like, oh, this consumption is associated with this health
Associate,
marker.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah. The cardiovascular markers. And it's like, well, okay, that doesn't take into account lifestyle, genetics, sleep, stress. Did you work a rough job? Did you have good relationships with people? Did you exercise? Were you exposed to heavy metals, chemicals in the air, all
yep,
kinds of things like bad work conditions? So many things influence health to just be like this amount of meat or this level of cholesterol. And it's well,
yep,
just pulling things out, and it becomes like sensationalism, right? Just like you mentioned the news, that's a really good example. The news, yeah, you can have these really sensational headlines, but then what's underneath doesn't match. And then especially if you have a person come along with an agenda, you can word certainly you can word a headline to be very provocative
yep,
or contrarian. You can take the same events, word it differently, and if that's all that the average person is exposed to, it can send a very different message to them, right? And at the
yep.
end of the day, it's about sending a message with this stuff, because
I'm
none of
gonna
us
have
are
to share.
capable of memorizing every detail of a study. So at some point, you have to walk away with a message.
Yep. My coworker, when he reads the paper, he'll read the fine print and he goes ballistic. And it's the funniest thing. I might have to share that on my Instagram stories because
Should.
you can't make this up how funny it is. I mean, the guy could be on Comedy Central the way he rants at the paper. It's so good. Do you
That's
see
awesome.
the title of the? It's like this big. It's like in the corner. Oh, the rants are just crazy. And
Yeah.
the angrier he gets, the higher his voice gets too. You know that one
Yeah.
actor in Fist Fight where he just talks like this? It just he just gets squeaky, like the voice gets higher and squeakier the angrier he gets. It's the funniest thing ever.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And this is something that you see in politics too, is the fact checking thing. And then sometimes you click on an article that supposedly fact check a claim, and then in the article they admit that the thing that they're fact checking was right, but they're like, well, that's not quite how this would be phrased by such and such expert. Like, you labeled this as mostly
Exactly.
false, but it was mostly true.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very disingenuous. Okay, so
Yeah, it's
back
pretty.
more directly on the topic of science. I have got some stuff I got to get off my chest, Kevin. I got to tell you. So, part of
Yeah.
what I have with the problems of science entering the discussion of exercise, and then maybe even more broadly, it's not only just about the fact that people conducting science don't always have good intentions. Well, like you said, the supplement companies, people funding science, obviously they have plenty of incentives to get the results that they want and then brag about them to the
Yep.
public and build trust based on something they paid for. And then also, even when studies are done well, they can be pulled out of context. Studies might not be conducted all that well. Headlines can be very misleading. Single points can be pulled out of a study where other points contradict it, or at least what someone might run. They might take that and run away with it, but then where they're going is contradicted by other points in that study. So there's lots that can go wrong there in the specifics, but the big picture, science is about knowledge, right? It goes back to that Latin word scientia, right? To
Yep.
to be able to have to discern knowledge and truth. My problem with the scientific stuff is it sort of paints this picture in people's minds where you're going to be in the dark about training. You're not going to know what kind of volume makes sense. You're not going to know what rates of progression, how often to add 5 pounds, or what exercises to do. You're not going to know how long something's going to take. You're not going to have a good idea how many exercises to do. It almost tries to make a monopoly on acquiring knowledge itself, where it's like if you didn't use strictly the scientific method to determine this, you're a caveman ignoramus who's just you're just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. And we would both emphasize experimentation is important in your program for the sake of figuring out what works for you. But that doesn't mean Kevin and I are recommending that people be reckless in how they go about building their program. Try anything, man. See what works. Maybe maxing out your back squat every day with a rounded back. Maybe it would feel good. No, there are things that are just
Breathe
plain
out
common
too.
sense. Yeah. Oh man, like the idea that without science, you're just like it's just a minefield, and you're just going to step on something without the scientists and their genius and cleverness to guide you through the minefield. No, it's
Yep.
not like that at all. There's so much from experience and intuition that causes you to think. You do your workout. How does the soreness affect you? You try and push more weight. What happens? Do you lose range of motion? Is it successful? Is it the same level of exertion? There's so many questions you can ask yourself that if you're just being honest and curious and thinking, right, you don't have to be a genius to do this stuff. And then if you pay attention, let alone learn from others, like I'm learning from you, you're learning from others online, the audience is learning from our discussions and our videos and our
Yep.
content, so on. And that's what's great about our community in general, the Noble Natties. It's very conducive to learning. But this idea that science is the way to get knowledge, oh, it's just so silly. And then when you see what happens in these studies sometimes too, they don't live up to the hype of science is the rock bed foundation of discovering knowledge, as if you can't think about EMG, right, versus some guy getting a pump. Here's how I figured out that the 45-degree angle of the humerus, right, like this type of thing for rowing, was ideal for rear delts. I figured it out. I grabbed some weights, I bent over, and then did different positions, and then
Yep.
just paid attention to where I felt the pump the most. And that doesn't tell me, oh boy, that was a great set because I got a pump, right? It's not
Yep.
about the pump for the sake of progress and like optimal, it's not an optimal workout just because of how the pump felt, but it certainly tells you where work is localized, doesn't it? Right?
Yep. You could
If a
feel where.
muscle's getting a pump, yeah, you
Yeah.
know, you know.
You could feel a good amount of resistance on your rear delt in this position more than that position, and sometimes that doesn't mean you only do that exercise. Sometimes you have a little bit of flexibility in your training. Maybe, for me, I love power raises. I love stretching my rear delt further this way and then
Mm,
going out.
yeah,
I
yeah,
used to like
yeah.
shortening it, but now I just love to stretch it more. And for other people, they love other variations. And me,
Absolutely.
I love to lay down in the gym. Like that's my
Yeah,
favorite reason to do
yeah.
power raises. I have an excuse to lie down in the gym.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, in all
And I love
seriousness,
Alex Leonidas, but on the note of the rear delt, he had a video while this was months ago now, where he was like ecstatic about an EMG study that was like It confirmed certain things he was doing or thoughts he had about that 45-degree angle being very rear delt focused, and other people are really trying to emphasize this. Well,
Yep.
if you're waiting for a study to corroborate it, like it's really not this grand revelation, right? Like if you just trust yourself to discern where you feel it in the muscles, that information is reliable. You produced it. Oh, you're just an anecdote. You're one person. That's not going to scale universal. Well, I'm sorry. We're all human beings. Even though we're different a little bit, we're not that different, right? Like human being, you're not that different. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
I
exactly. So,
you can go off a study, of course, but then if you got guys that you know in the gym that you trust for information when it comes to their weight training, and they go by a very similar type of exercise selection to the study, okay, then you can say I kind of verified it by looking around my environment and also testing myself as the test dummy. You can't always just go by other people. You have to go by what your body works with too. So
yep,
our bodies
yep,
kind of work well together. So like if you and another person work well on a certain exercise, then great. So for some people, they just love dumbbell bench because it feels more comfortable for their shoulders and it hits their chest very well. Does it guarantee that it's going to build more chest mass than the barbell? I would argue no.
yeah,
No, it depends on your body, and some people probably feel better on barbells, some people better on dumbbells. So,
yeah.
and I love to talk about bench press, so it's an
Bench press
easy.
is a great exercise. Yeah. No, I think you're right. It's just because that one suits you better, even that doesn't guarantee better gains, right, across time. It
Exactly.
might mean you're more likely to stick to it, maybe even less likely to get injured or skip your workout, but doesn't mean you're getting better results just because it matches you better necessarily.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. And I think sometimes it's to the point where you could say, hey, if you control for the level of effort and dedication, where, okay, if you worked just as hard on barbell bench press and dumbbell bench, sure, the strength carryover is going to be different, but
Yep.
would the hypertrophy and just like absolute strength in a general sense be that different? No, I mean, 6 months of training where all the variables are the same, but the difference is just barbell bench versus dumbbell bench. It's probably not going to be that different, right? It's not
Yep.
dramatically, anyways. Yeah, yeah,
And this
good.
guy, he's a younger guy, and he was benching. He tried barbell benching for a while, and then he tried dumbbell benching for a while. And he said, "I just want to do a bench press and see how my strength is." And I was like, "Okay, go ahead." And he actually was very close in numbers to where he was before. And I'm not going to say carryover is complete BS, but I think people overuse the carryover.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm not going to say this is the study, but there's also studies on strength that this is good for strength too, and blah blah blah. This could increase your bench press with this exercise.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
often see people hyping up the back extension and just doing back extensions for deadlifts.
yeah.
You can't replace a deadlift, and you can't replace a bench press. Like there's something about it.
Yeah, even some people like Steve Shaw, I would tend to agree with this, although obviously an RDL is closer, or even especially a stiff leg deadlift is closer to a conventional deadlift than a back extension. But
Yeah,
some people think that the RDL is, hey, less fatigue, but it's like super duper carryover to conventional deadlift. And it's like, well, is it hitting your traps and lats as hard? Is it hitting the glutes, hamstrings, and deadlift with the exact same mechanics? Like,
right.
if it's a different exercise to the point where you think, oh, this is super desirable, okay, there's going to be consequences to why it's desirable in the first place, especially with fatigue. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
classic one. Now there are some things that I will say it's nice to see studies corroborate because they're just so obvious and common sense. There's one I saw in an Alex Leonidas video where he said, and this just makes intuitive sense. I'm not saying I, carefully combed through the study to make sure it was good, but it was something like when they compared different power lifters, the single greatest, I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but the single greatest predictor of the bench press strength was the pectoral mass. Like it was literally just the guy who's got the bigger pecs, very reliably across the board, okay, he's got the biggest bench. Like that makes sense, and that thankfully that corroborates the idea of hey, size and strength aren't that different. Can't separate it that hard. Obviously, in the case of powerlifters, there's a specificity component where they're all training bench press. So it would make sense that with that thing controlled, then it's the hypertrophy that makes a difference. Because obviously, if you had the same hypertrophy, but one guy was super invested in dumbbell bench, one guy was super invested, there's going to be a little bit of a difference. This guy's going to be a little bit weaker than that guy on the dumbbell bench. He might be a little bit weaker than the barbell, just because it's just the skills aren't exactly the same. But hey, if you're controlling for the same exercise variation, the mass, the muscle that you've got is the predictor. That totally makes sense. It's contractile
Yeah.
tissue. Why would anything else be the single greatest predictor of that performance? Yeah.
Perfectly spoken. Also, another one is nocebos. Like, I think that
Yeah.
was in your podcast with Protein Man, the fear mongering of exercises.
The fear mongers.
Obviously, people will say squatting is bad for your knees, deadlifts is bad for your back, benching this way is bad for your shoulders, etc.
Yep.
So I feel like well-known physical therapists, you've seen viral videos on YouTube. I'm sure some of you have, on so and so back surgeon says this is dangerous, or so and so personal or a physical therapist says this is bad for you. They're not athletes. Like, they haven't been in the trenches with the athletes the entire process.
Nope. Nope.
So
Nope. Yep. They're
you,
they're they're actually they're speaking from a place where they really haven't thought through it. Or their ideas haven't been put to the test, let's say. Right?
yep,
Like there's that, and this is it's like a huge part of human history, right? Is there are these people in society, let's call them intellectuals, right?
yep.
I don't know. Are you familiar with the author Thomas Sowell?
No.
He's an economist who's talked a lot about intellectuals and politics and race and different dynamics in American and world history. And he's a very sober-minded thinker. And a lot of his this ties into even military history, where there are these people with their big ideas, and they might very well be smart and formally educated in a very narrow sense of here's how we do the teaching and the studying and the projects and the writing, but those ideas don't match real life. And in military history, that's very serious. This is something you see in war, where people who are not experienced go into a leadership position. You're putting people's lives in danger from a leadership standpoint. And that's what that physical therapist or the scientists are doing. If they're not also in the gym hitting those numbers, I don't really care what their recommendations are, right? Just like some soldier who's only a sergeant or a captain isn't going to have the same level of respect for some officer above him who has no combat experience whatsoever, right?
Yep.
Yeah, yep. You got to put your ideas to the test, and it's brutally devastating to your ego, and perhaps even it could be devastating to a career of a scientist or a physical therapist to be like, yeah, this psychosocial physical model thing, yeah, maybe that doesn't match our expectations of what we thought it was doing. Yeah, okay, maybe this model of injury and the way we thought the tissues worked, yeah, maybe we have to go back and revise that. Books have been printed, awards have been given, newspapers have been, plastered these people's faces to make them famous. Do you really
Yep.
think they're going to be in a hurry to renounce their own ways and be like, it's time to start again? Or, it's time to admit some meathead in a gym with a below
Yep.
average IQ was right. That's painful when you're
Especially
a
if they're
smart
making a
person.
ton of money on it. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Recipe for disaster.
Recipe for disaster, totally. Yeah, yeah. So your ideas have to survive combat experience. Put them
Yep.
to battle, put them to test, and the ones that are really the best ideas, they will stand the test of time.
Yeah, they will.
Absolutely. Now, on the note of science, this is funny, and this is just, I try not to make fun of it because genuinely science can be, I think, very helpful. People might label me anti-science if they have just a brief discussion with me over Instagram, arguing in comments or something, or maybe they
Oh
see one of my videos.
yeah.
But really, it can be a beautiful thing when used appropriately. But at the same time, you look at exercise science, and here's my experience in university studying kinesiology. I had a professor for molecular biology class, and excuse me, cell biology, and, uh, and he told us about an experience where they were riding exercise bikes for the purpose of seeing, how much like hard work and effort and time, like how hard would you have to work to significantly change the body's core temperature, right?
Oh
Right, like the surface temperature and the core temperature not always the same. Your body through what's called homeostasis basically just means that the body collectively works really hard to maintain these precise conditions so that you don't die. It's good that the body does that. So much so that they wanted to see, okay, how much do you have to just grind exercise to dangerously increase your core temperature? Which, I mean, I'm not sure why that necessarily was something that needed to be studied, because again,
Yeah,
going
that's
back to intuition, you know,
quite whataboutism, if you ask me.
yeah, yeah. Well, and if you're as far as like temperature is concerned, if your athletes are not reporting things to you on a certain day under certain conditions about, what feeling like they need to pass out, they're hydrated, their performance is good, and you're measuring performance at different assessments throughout their training, do you really need to know these things, right?
Exactly.
Or would it not be obvious based on what happens that you can observe in your experience? Shouldn't that tell you what you need to know about like managing the body's temperature? So it's
Yeah.
kind of a moot point to study in the first place. And do you want to know how they accomplished this, Kevin?
Sure. Yeah.
So they rode exercise bikes, but in order to get the most accurate, it wasn't. They weren't just going to take any means of temperature, because in the world of science, folks, there's an emphasis on being very accurate and precise. Sounds good, doesn't it? Okay, we can all value precision. Well, in order to be precise in their measurement of the body's temperature, they rode bikes where it was modified in a way where they could have a thermometer shoved up their rear end while riding the
Oh
bike.
boy.
And so my former professor had to do this for part of his research on study. He rode a bike with a thermometer up his butt. So this is where the world of scientific thinking can get you if it's not guided by common sense. You're riding a bike with a thermometer up your butt to discover something that probably didn't need to be discovered in the first place. Yeah, because it didn't. Yeah. So, so,
Well, you got
so
to
to
look up the
think that's where
measurement
society's money
software,
goes, right? Oh
right?
man, the amount of money and time and pain and oh yeah. So
Would there be any level of embarrassment to that speech that he said to you then? Shoving something up his rear end for science? No, I mean,
well, I won't share any names. So goodness.
no, exactly.
Yeah, but that's just it, right? Scientific thinking, if you don't come at it from another perspective, can take you to some pretty weird methods and some pretty weird conclusions. Is the key
Exactly.
takeaway there? Yeah, yeah. Oh
Holy
boy.
cow.
Yeah, and this is a big problem in the scientific world. You see lots of money, and there's like departments and like subsections to departments, and assistant here, assistant this. And when you see people do like what would you say, audits, right? They audit it to see where money's going. And we talked about incentives. It's not only companies selling products that have incentives to get the research that they want. Scientists have jobs and careers and reputations and
Yep.
tenure, right? Like and they're fighting for tenure if they don't have it. So there's an incentive for people to just keep doing research. So in my opinion, there's a lot of science, especially in the exercise world, but probably other fields as well, where it's redundant research, it's not interesting, the methods are questionable, why they're studying it in the first place is questionable, and it just sort of it's this monstrosity of a machine that's just it's self-perpetuating. It's
Yep.
research for research's sake, and that's a huge danger with science. Yeah.
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 A lot of content recycling, like natural hypertrophy would say.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The scientists
Recycling
are
content
recycling content.
is redundant. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So next time, if you're a science guru watching this and you really care about what the studies have to say, meta-analysis, and you hear what a video, someone speaking this video, or you read a Menno Henselman's post on Instagram, and you think, I'm going to change my program because of that. Let me just plead
Read the
with your
fine
heart
print.
for a moment. Oh yeah, fine print, fine print. Do you really want to trust the institutions that are going to stick a thermometer up your butt while you're riding a bike, or are you going to trust us, the gym bros? The gym bros who just
Exactly.
want you to pick things up, put them down, to critically think about your training, and then just have a good time, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah. Oh boy.
I
And then,
love it.
yeah, the Menno Henselman's thing. Do you have anything you want to say on him? Because I want to finish off by speaking about him specifically, and then I think that'll cover the science stuff.
I don't really know Mendel Henselman so much, so I'm gonna have to let you take this one.
Excellent, excellent. So,
It'll
speaking
educate
of
me as well.
definitely, well, I'll start by saying this. He's clearly a smart guy. He's clearly
Yep.
well educated. Menno Henselman's, for those who don't know, He has the Menno Henselman's PT course. So it's a rather expensive course that you do over a number of weeks. I believe you can do it online or in person. And so he certifies personal trainers. He's a personal trainer himself. I believe he has a master's degree. I think he's Dutch. And he goes around the world and does like seminars and speech about exercise science, how to train more, optimally, more scientifically, that sort of thing. So he's very invested in it. I'm not sure how old he is. I think he's probably in like his 30s, somewhere in there. And he's in reasonably good shape, but no offense to the guy, Bald Omni Man, Natural Hypertrophy, Jeffrey Very Schofield, these types of guys, like the more meathead, quote unquote types, even though I would consider all those guys pretty smart guys, they mog
Yep.
him, right, physically and like strength wise, size wise, they mog him. But nonetheless, he's got a
Yep.
decent physique. He's got a decent physique. He's a smart guy. But he'll post things, and sometimes it's like, okay, here's one of his headlines: stretch mediated hypertrophy can triple your biceps gains, basically, right? So going back to isolating variables, you mean to imply to me that there's a general concern, there's a general trend in the public where someone is training with method A and method B is going to get them triple the results. I don't know about you and your, BS detector in your head that has alarms going off, but when I hear someone say method A, oh yeah, sure, that's fine, but method B, that's going to triple your results. When someone
Exactly.
tries to make a claim that it makes that big of a difference, you can just throw that away. That's garbage, right?
It
Like
is.
it doesn't
Like,
pass the old
don't curl the weight
the
up.
smell
Just let it
test.
control it down every rep. Don't bother lifting it up. You just clean the weight up and then control it down. Can't wait to
Yeah.
see that happen in the public gym.
Well, and the idea that anyone could be doing any biceps program and somehow leave two-thirds of their gains on the table, the only way I see that being possible, forget about stretch mediated hypertrophy for a second, the only way that could be possible is if you're working like not hard at all, like just a little bit of work, just the bare minimum, like a set a week or 2 sets a week. And then, hey, if you do 5 sets per week, hey, look, you got better gains because you worked harder and then you did a variation or
Exactly.
something like that. Like the idea that there's this any realistic trend of people who have two-thirds of their gains left on the table, absurd. But here's what the study actually was. And so it had people basically do this, Kevin. There was a preacher curl machine where they would do like the bottom half, and I believe the other side was the top half, something like that. It had to do with preacher
Oh yeah.
curls and splitting up the range of motion. And I could be butchering this, but basically the point is that it was something like the bottom portion, because that's where the stretch on the muscle is so much more stimulative. That's why there was like almost triple the gains between
Yep.
groups of who did shortened phase versus the stretch phase. But I asked the question, who trains like that? Who trains half this rep and half that? You're going through the full range of motion, so this idea that like, oh, I need to add some stretch exercises. Well, if you're just doing a large range of motion on any biceps curl, you're probably doing more than either of these guys are as far as range of motion is concerned. And then as far
Yep.
as stretch, do you really need to feel a stretch to get enough range of motion to get it? And the whole point of these studies, Kevin, I'm not sure how much you're familiar with the term stretch mediated hypertrophy. There's this idea that
Not at all.
literally, well, so the idea is this: they can't explain it, and I believe it's because it doesn't exist, right? I don't actually believe in stretch mediated hypertrophy, but the idea is that there's this mechanism where somehow by the muscle being under a stretch, that specifically elevates your gains. It's not just they've moved past, okay, doing
Cut this
work.
little slice of the pie out, not the whole pot. Not look at the whole pie. That's probably responsible for most of the results, right? Let's
Exactly,
isolate this
exactly.
variable because it feels like a cool thing to post. Yeah.
Well, it's very spicy, right? Especially if
Oh
you're
yeah.
gonna make claims like you've got two-thirds of your gains left on the table, that's a spicy claim. That's gonna get some attention. But
That
the
doesn't
idea
sit
is
well
that,
with that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, literally the stretch is somehow like just leveling up your gains, and there's no mechanism provided. They can't explain it. They can't explain it with a chart and a whatever
been DM'd
anatomy.
about like, oh, what's better for you, stretching or contracting? And I'm just like, do the reps you normally do and do them with control.
Yeah, yeah, if there's a range of motion that you're genuinely not flexible enough to control or do without
Yep,
pain, that's too excessive. And if there's a
it
range of
is.
motion that causes pain, even if you are flexible enough because of, oh, you've got a back uh, injury history, so ATG back squats aren't going that well. Hey, maybe you could go ATG on front squats and then just go to parallel or slightly above on back squats, get a lot of benefit
Yeah.
staying in positions that work for your joints. That makes a lot
Yeah.
more sense to me.
Oh yeah.
That was a nuanced, reasonable, individualized advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the idea is, it's not enough anymore to just say doing work, period, right? Half rep, full rep, stretch rep, incline curl, this type of curl. It's not enough to just say doing work breaks down muscle, and when it heals, you're bigger and stronger. Now people are getting in these rabbit holes, Kevin, where it's like, yeah, the incline curl for the stretch medial hypertrophy, and then do this type of RDL for the stretch medial hypertrophy, and then do this type of squat and leg press for the stretch medial hypertrophy. And it's like, come on, it's
Yeah.
about hard work. That's what it's
Yes.
about. Yeah,
A lot of smoke and mirrors.
it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. And I think it's a trend that, much like the whole frequency, or maybe you remember these days, muscle protein synthesis was just like, whoa,
Oh
let's
yeah.
learn about muscle protein synthesis.
You
You
gotta do
know?
full body. More time. You gotta increase your frequency because that's the best way to train.
Yeah,
More protein windows for your body to regenerate tissue.
yeah,
What is it? You have more protein stimulus frequencies per week
yeah.
because you can. What is it? You have a 24 to 48 hour
Yeah,
window
a
for.
window, a very important window to hit. Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, but in that discussion, I think the key takeaway for the protein synthesis, if people are interested in, and maybe if you disagree with anything we said so far, please, like, dislike, comment, subscribe, share, and tell us why you disagree with us. Right? Be respectful. I'll happily get back
Yeah,
to you. I think Kevin will as well. But
it's very
with
like
the
minor things that sometimes people focus on the forest for the trees, or
yeah,
they miss
they
the forest
do,
for the trees, so to speak.
they do. And on
Yeah.
muscle protein synthesis, um, it's like this. Sure, you can stimulate it more frequently, right? Yeah, if I train more, there's more opportunities for growth and damage, and therefore the thing that's called muscle protein synthesis. But there's a difference between how often something happens and the magnitude of its occurrence. So
Yep.
if I do 5 sets of squats and I can heal from that, that's a bigger magnitude of muscle protein synthesis versus doing 2 sets, right? So it's
Yep.
like, oh, just do it more often. Well, going back to the whole, you can't maximize volume, you can't maximize frequency. Otherwise, you're minimizing opportunities for recovery. So
Yep.
the frequency of muscle protein synthesis, just focusing on that ignores the magnitude of it and its
Yep.
implications. So
It's like the Venn
another
diagram
whoosh.
of intensity, frequency, and volume. You want to
Yeah,
have all three variables in check in a very good blend
yeah.
to make great progress. And you want to be somewhere in the middle with your training and having a realistic, reasonable approach to everything in life, especially training, of course.
Yeah. You can keep it reasonable while still working hard, keeping it simple, and make great gains. Is there any like final message to help people keep a clear mind and to not overthink in their training? Any takeaway message on this whole topic of science before we finish off here?
And I'll say the true meaning of optimal is your ability to adhere to something consistently and to make those noticeable subtle changes in progress, because progress is sneaky and you got to be able to track it with a clear present mind, so to speak. And that would be my closing topic or my closing sentence.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, keeping a clear mind is so important. And yeah, there's a real there. You're right. Sneaky. It's subtle. It's hard to appreciate with enough time. Progress, right? Every session. There's a point where gone are the days where every session it's obvious that you're better, but you
Yep.
are, right? Like or at least on average, you're better on a week to week basis, and that makes a big difference. Weeks go by, don't they? They turn into months, and those turn into years. So that's
Yeah.
great. Awesome, awesome. And yeah, I'll just give my final thoughts, which is, guys, if you're worried about not having enough sources, right, to back up your ideas and how you train and your preferences, just keep this in mind. You don't need a place of authority to argue from to justify why you train the way you train. If you see it works, doesn't
Exactly.
hurt, hasn't led to injuries, maybe it's different than other people. That's okay. If it suits your budget, your access to equipment, and you're not making excuses all the time to get yourself off the hook, and you're having fun, and you're hitting your goals, well, hey, modify accordingly when those outcomes change. But remember, those outcomes are definitive proof that what you're doing is working. So clearly, whether you're limited up here in intelligence or not, whatever your thought process is, whatever your methods are, hey, if the outcomes match, then you can always infer that those methods are more than adequate. You have the ability to do this without the science nerds helping you.
Yep. Plain and
Perfect.
simple.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Kevin. It was a real treat to have you on. And so, maybe we'll do this again in the future. I look forward to seeing you have a YouTube channel where you post some content and I can watch your videos. That'll be good. That'll be good.
And I will do so. I'm planning on it this year, so thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching this. Go ahead and follow Hypertrophy with Kev on Instagram. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you guys in the next one.